Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are in the world. This is Howie, and I'm here to help you win with money. In today's special episode of Investing 102, I'm going to teach you how there's different level of thinking when it comes to budgeting. And some of you may be wondering, how the heck is there different levels of thinking when it comes to a budget or a spending plan? And that's what I'm going to cover today. It's most likely something you never heard of or probably never done. So stay tuned and see what I will show you. And don't forget, make sure you hit the bell on my YouTube channel. And also, if you're using a Brave browser, you can come right up here and give me a tip. You can send the tip right straight to me through your browser if you have any BATs. Also, if you're on Facebook, you can also join Facebook group Investing 102. This is a group, so you just type in Investing 102. This is where all the seasoned investors talk about all these other higher level thinking. Again, I teach that it's not that the level 101 is bad. Sometimes that's where most people stay, and that's okay. But this is where we discuss all the other stuff. Is there a level 102? Is there a level 201 thinking? An advanced level thinking? So on to today's episode. Let me explain this real quick. Before we begin, always start with a simple definition. What is a budget? Now, the more modern terminology is what most people like to call a spending plan. Whether you're a business or an individual, most of us spend money, regardless if you know where that money is going or in which category. For example, if I ask you, how much money do you think you spend on groceries? You may guess, and you may be a few $100s off. What if I ask you, how much money do you actually put in your car each week or each month? Now, you may get it right on a weekly basis, but if I said, how much do you spend on a monthly basis? But for most of us, we may be 40, 50, or 60, or $100 off what we actually think we're spending. And that's what a budget or spending plan is for. So why do budgets fail? Most of us, when we hear that term budget, we cringe, we hate it, we dislike it. We don't even like talking about it. In all the years of me helping clients, one of the first things we always start with is, do you have a budget? Do you have a spending plan? Do you know where your cash is going? There's always a couple questions that most financial coaches like to answer. I like to know, how much cash do you have remaining at the end of the month after you pay all your bills and all your obligations? Most people don't know. And there's a reason for that. Most people don't want to know, or they know and they just dislike what happened or what the story told them. So a lot of people don't have a budget. And the reason is, maybe they done it in the past and they didn't like to know that they were spending more than they were making. Other people just don't want to know because they just want to live and spend whatever money they make. The problem is, when you don't know, most of us are actually spending more than we make. There's a lot of people who spend more than they make each month. And at some point, you have to deal with it. The other reason why budgets fail is most people don't update or adjust their budget. And what that means is, you don't create a budget once and that's it. You don't create it just to look at where your spending is and then don't do anything with it next month. In fact, this is where those who try it fail. So the first group fail because they don't want to do it, but those who do a budget eventually stop doing it. And so I want to encourage you. The only way to make this work is you got to do it over a long period of time until you know where your money is going. And once you get to the other side, it's a lot easier. How to make it work? If you're just starting out, you need to create a budget before the month starts. And as the day goes on, you should track your spending every day. In the old days, we didn't have smartphones or apps, so what we do, we collect the receipt, but you put it in your pocket or your wallet. At the end of the day, you go home, you got a little log or journal. Nowadays, you got a spreadsheet. You put it in the spreadsheet, and you track your daily spending. At the end of the month, You gather up maybe your credit card receipts or your banking statements and everything else, and you try to track and reconcile all your spending for the month, and then you compare it against your budget. And when you do that, you get a more accurate reflection of how the actual month went. You can't really account for a flat tire in advance. Did you know your roof is going to blow out and spend $20,000 in advance? And so budgeting is not a science. It's just a plan to say this is how much money we want to allocate to each category. Once you have a working budget, how do you make this thing work for you? A budget is just telling you how you spend your money, and then you at some point have to decide which categories are important to you and which ones you can cut back on. If you're spending $200 on Starbucks coffee, I'm okay with that. But if you're in the negative cash flow each month, you need to figure out what categories you have to cut out to save money. And this is how a budget works. By tracking the actual spending against your budget, you need to know, are you in a negative cash flow or positive cash flow each month? If you're negative, you have to learn how to reduce some of your spending, or you have to increase your income. And this is what a budget does. Once you know how to do that, you have to look at the story, figure out what it's telling you, and then you have to make some minor adjustments. And for each adjustment, you get better and better. And the goal is to go and get into the positive cash flow category. I know a lot of clients, they start off with either zero monthly cash flow, and then they get to the positive $200 cash flow. And then they like this, and then their car payment is done. And you know what they do? They don't buy a new car. So their cash flow now jumps up to $500 positive every month. So they're paying down their debts with the extra $500 they have. And then eventually over time, they now have $1,000 positive cash flow. And now they can start saving for the things they care about without going into debt. They save for a vacation. Maybe they wanted a big screen TV. Maybe you want a fancy purse. Whatever it may be, you can start planning for it in advance. And yes, there are many people who have positive cash flow that are well over $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month. They can buy other assets that generate more money for them. And that's really the key to all this. And the next part is something new that most people never talk about. Ideally, when you start doing this process, you do have to track it on either a daily basis or a monthly basis, and you just have to do it until you get really good at it. But once you know you're always positive cash flow each month, it means you're spending less than you make and that you always have a surplus. And when you have a surplus, even when emergencies come up, you can pay for the emergencies. When you do this long enough, you're going to have money set aside for emergencies. You're going to have assets that you can sell in the case of a big emergency. And while none of us plan for those big stuff, the good thing is you have enough money or cash or assets to pay for some of these. And lastly, there is financial freedom at the end of the road. I do a budget very different from most people, and I'm going to show you that on my next chart. For those who are level 0, they don't have a plan. So what does that mean? They never have a budget or spending plan. Now there are people who try. That's the level 101. They use a budget, but you do it monthly, and that's this level here, and you fail. But if you don't give up and you keep on doing it every month, that's fine. That's awesome. You don't want to get off this level 101. That's just a starting point. And what I like to do is, really, budgeting in itself doesn't work unless you track the actual spending. So I consider that the next level. So if you're doing a budget and you're tracking it and then you're adjusting your behavior, then you're already on this level. You're at the next step. And the last step is really, once you have this positive cash flow mindset, and once the cash flow is well over $1,000 or more per month, most likely you'll never ever go back to a negative cash flow. And at that point, many of my clients, what they do is instead of tracking budgeting or spending plan on a daily basis or a monthly basis, they actually move it into a quarterly basis or every 6 months. And eventually, you can do this once a year. And I know it's going to sound weird because people say, how do you budget doing it once a year? Well, once a year is pretty easy. You don't track the details anymore. I don't keep receipts. I don't keep every penny that I spend. What I do is I look at my net worth, how much money's in your saving account, how much money's in your checking account, how much is in all your assets. And you track that at the beginning of the year, and then at the end of the year, you track it again. And if you see that if you're spending more than you make, you'll see it because you're taking money out of somewhere and you see that your cash in your checking account or your saving account may drop down. And then you look at some of the other assets and maybe you sold some assets to cover it, or maybe you use your fully funded emergency fund to fund some of your expensive spending, like if you bought a new car and you want to pay half of it in cash or whatever it may be. So this is how a lot of people who are in a positive cash flow of $1,000 or more, at some point we don't need to track it on a daily basis. And I know that's totally different. You probably never heard of that before. Dave Ramsey and more traditional financial gurus always say you need to have a budget for the rest of your life. They say millionaires still have it. Well, and if they do, that's fine. It's not for me. I'm not going to track it to the every penny or the nickel or receipts or monthly. I don't have to do it that way. I track it once a year. And I can tell if I'm spending more than I make, or I can also tell I'm still spending less than I make, and everything else is growing. All my assets are growing. My bank account is growing. My checking account is growing. My investments are growing. And everything else I'm doing is growing in value. So that's why I have this freedom to track less and less and less the longer you do it. And it becomes easier and easier. And that's my tip for you. Trust me, most people don't teach that. They still have this very traditional thinking of everybody stays on a budget, a zero-based budget for the rest of your life. And to me, that's a very basic kindergarten type thinking. Will it work? Sure, it will work. I don't have the time, or do I need to track it at that level anymore? So my level 201 thinking says, as long as you know you're not going backwards, I don't need to be exact or precise anymore. Now, do that mean that once you hit positive cash flow, you're allowed to do this? Absolutely not. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying once you go from a zero cash flow to a positive cash flow, you have mastered it. That is not what I'm teaching. So I want to back up and make sure you guys understand this. You need to be tracking this for a while. You got to prove to yourself that you will never go backwards. Once you're in a positive cash flow, the first go is get it up to 1,000. And then, because if you have a positive cash flow of 1,000, what does that mean? Every year you get $12,000 in the positive. So once you're above that and it's growing, then normally I tell my clients you can scale back in your tracking and maybe do it less frequent. And then we'll up, and I track it with them. Once a year I go through the numbers with my clients and we see, are they still doing okay? Are they still not overspending? Because by that time, we can then agree if they're overspending again, they have a problem. And then they may need to go back to tracking on a monthly basis. I hope that you get to the other side of this, where you don't need to budget anymore because it becomes a mindset. You have this millionaire mindset, or you have this positive cash flow mindset that you will never go back. Because if you never go back, you're going to do fine. That brings this episode to an end. How you can level up your thinking in budgeting. Probably something you never heard of. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you like this, share it with a friend who may never heard this before. This is a different type of concept. Like I said, most gurus don't really teach something like this. You want to be able to just have freedom. And freedom is not about tracking every nickel and dollar and penny you have for the rest of your life. I have freedom because I know, regardless of how I spend money every year, I'm still under what I'm making. Or eventually, most of your investments become passive and that it makes more money than what you spend anyway. So it becomes easier and easier and easier. So it's all part of the plan. Again, let's go. Let's win with money together. Let's do this together. Let's do it $1 at a time and have a profitable day. Bye-bye.